Welcome to the Red Review with me, Jeremy Brim. The Red Review is brought to you by Growth Ignition, the transformation and capability development business, all in the work-winning space, and the Bid Toolkit, its product set in bid process and training videos.
Welcome everybody. So I'm Jeremy Brim. I lead a business called Growth Ignition. We're consultants, transformation consultants, and training people all in the work-winning space. So whether it's figuring out how to approach market research and business planning, how to conduct account-based marketing for B2B, B2G businesses, quite different to B2C, or particularly whether it's key account management of your key accounts, capture of your key pursuits, or writing winning bids. We help you figure out how to do that, what your process and performance environment needs to look like, roles and responsibilities. But particularly we train people in all of that stuff through the funnel. The business has been going just over 6 years, and we've been having a great time working with many of the main building contractors where Carrie-Ann and I met, but also work with outsourcers, IT businesses, lawyers, professional services, all sorts. And so we do share, or we've begun to share more and more free content. So these webinars are free. This will be distributed through our Red Review podcast channel, both in video form on YouTube and in audio form. You guys will all get a link to the recording of this. So hello if you're joining us on the recording later. But we also provide a whole bunch of free content. We do weekly blog posts. We have the biggest podcast in the world in this stuff because there aren't any others, called The Red Review with me, where we interview vendors and different experts, etc., in the bidding and capture space in particular. And then we provide some free training, bite-sized training stuff, our bid writing basics program and things like that. You'll get an email after this with a link to the recording and various bits and pieces that you're very welcome to access. So the new Procurement Act has happened. I've been exchanging WhatsApp messages with my expert friend Gemma Waring, who we've done one of these webinars with, about how it's going, and it all seems to be going all right. You know, some things aren't particularly changing, some things have changed a bit, but nothing earth-shattering and nothing's fallen over. But reviewing the policy content that came out just days before, the week before the Act was due to go live on Monday this week, I did take note that there was a great deal of action around social value, and I'm not sure whether I should have seen that coming. As I was talking to Carrie-Ann off camera, a couple of you got a little bit of a podcast of Carrie-Ann and I talking about moving house and stuff. I moved house on Friday, so last week was a bit frenetic. But certainly I was surprised by a couple of things in the policy statement, but particularly how much reference there was to social value and indeed new policy notices on social value. So as I don't know enough about this stuff to be able to talk about it for more than 4 minutes, I thought I'd better phone up one of my mates who really knows what they're talking about. We like to get real experts, real practitioners, not bid writers trying to be good at something, and ask the real questions and understand the real position. So welcome, Carrie-Ann, if that was enough.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, that was good. That was good.
So just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you do, and then we'll get into it, if that's all right.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm Carrie-Ann Huelin. I'm a social value consultant. Have my own consultancy and have had that running for about 8 years now. Previously, I've worked for Tier 1 contractors, kind of in-house for the enemy, doing it directly for those bigger organisations at delivery level earlier in my career, all the way up to kind of leading social value function a bit later in my career, a good 15 years after I first started. But I've also meddled and worked client side too, so been in the shoes of public sector organisations. A lot of procurement related activity, because social value has been embedded in procurement for a long time now. So writing social value questions, scoring social value questions. So I've been that guy, that person scoring your answers when you submit bids and things like that as well. So I kind of have this like quite well-rounded, holistic view to social value, but also understand that it is changing and the political and economic climate of the world changes this stuff on a regular basis, and as practitioners have to pivot to that, have to use our experience to try and understand that in a particular way, and then help everybody else get to grips with this stuff. And I don't like to complicate the subject matter. I'm quite straight talking and keep things as simple as possible. So you will probably pick up on that once we get into today's presentation. I will be honest if I don't know the answers to some questions, because yes, I've been in this world for 18 years, but I certainly don't know everything, and I still learn something new daily, weekly. So that's just a little bit about me, just to give you a bit of insight into the perspective and the kind of lens that I'm coming from with the experience I've had for nearly 2 decades now, which is scary. Makes me feel very old.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming along, Carrie-Ann, and making the time. I've always valued that you understood this very special world of social value, but also the bidding aspect, how we answer these questions and do a good job with our solutions for communities. It's quite a rare balance, actually. You get many social value practitioners who are quite scared of bidding people when they're asked to write stuff for bids and things. But it's obviously becoming, well, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, it's becoming a bigger and bigger scoring factor in public sector bidding. It's moving towards a much bigger percentage of the marks. And so, well, let's get into it. You've got some slides.
Yeah, I have got some slides, yeah.
As I said, I'm very happy to pick up questions in the chat or Q&A as we go. Knowing me, I've probably not set it up right, so one works and one doesn't. But
I can see your chat little number 1 already, so something's in there. I'm not clicking on anything because I'm scared of what's going to happen on the screen if I do. So, but I can see there's something in the chat already, maybe from somebody. So that's working.
If those don't work, send me an email. But yeah, we'll get underway. So,
cool. So yeah, just wanted to say a little bit about this bidding challenge before I dive into these specific Act and social value model slides. But I've talked to a lot of people in the last couple of weeks about the difference between social value delivery and bidding, and the fact that it is catastrophically a different skill set and task for people that are practitioners in social value. And the comparison I kind of use is, it works for people that drive a car. So if you passed a driving test quite a number of years ago, the bid world of social value is like having you drive and come up with your own style and your own knowledge of the road and other road users, and to get your teeth into that over a long period of time, and then say, hey, we've got this challenge for you, so we want you to pass your driving test again. And I think for most of us, if someone said to us we had to pass our driving test now after driving for a long time, that would be pretty awful, and we wouldn't be used to the clinical, sterile, process-driven, like slightly unpleasant environment that the driving test happened in. So when we say that social value bidding and delivery are 2 different things, it's like having an experienced driver on the road in one circumstance and someone who's passing a test in the other when they're writing a bid. And that's why it feels weird. That's why it's challenging for people to be able to flip between those 2 types of thinking and stuff like that. You can do it, but you've just got to learn how to do that and train yourself to go back to the basics and the clinical sterile world to do your bidding, and then go back into your knowledgeable kind of more holistic approach with delivery. So that's just a little bit of something I've been talking to people about in the last couple of weeks. So I thought I'd just let you know what I've been saying. So blimey, have we had a lot of documentation out and a lot of things thrown at us with social value now that the new Procurement Act is live. And, for someone that's been around this stuff for a long time, it's kind of lovely that social value is still at the heart of this new piece of legislation and all this guidance that we have now to work to, especially given the global climate with some of this stuff that we've got going on. So I feel kind of proud of us that we're still keeping this at the centre of what we do, and we're not afraid of of keeping that alive through some of the political turmoil that we're seeing elsewhere. So I think we should all feel really pleased with ourselves that we're having these conversations and feel inspired to keep the flame alive as we go through some of the other challenges. So I want to just try and demystify and talk a little bit about what's been published, what it means, things to look out for, and to just prompt some conversation and some thoughts in the audience around this new model and what the procurement policy statement is saying about social value. So we don't feel too terrible when these new bid questions land and we're having to deliver against some of these new structures that we've been given. So I want to talk about some of the basics. I just want to give you like 5 key things about some of the documents that have come out lately. You will have to read them. Some of them are quite short and sweet, actually, and they sound scarier than they are when you actually open them. They're only a few pages long, and you can make your way through that. Some are a little bit longer and a bit more complicated, but you will need to get your reading cap on to do some bedtime reading with some of these documents. I want to talk about some stuff that, in my view, is a little bit better now that we've had these new documents released to us and we've changed a few things. Some stuff that's a little bit more tricky now because of the changes that they've made for us. So some stuff we're going to have on our radar, and maybe some stuff that's going to make us have to change some data capture and some processes or policies that we have to be ready to tackle some of these questions, and a few little hints and tips on what to do to get ready. This is really hard for me to do because I have loads of ideas to help people on how to tackle some of these new challenges we've got and how you can put things in place to meet the requirements and the sub-criteria of the new model. But I don't have loads of time. I want to talk to you for like maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I will answer some questions and have a chat to you as well. So I've had to rein it in a little bit, but if anybody wants to speak to me after this about any more ideas on any of it, you can just drop me an email because you've got my contact details. So let's get into it. Right. So there's a few documents floating around. This is the Act. So this is the Procurement Act itself, the actual piece of legislation that's on a slightly different website. I think what I can do is, just thinking about it, when I get these slides to be able to be sent out to people, I'll maybe just put a little reference slide at the end with some of the right links in for you as well, so you know you're looking at the right thing, because the Act is on a different website to the gov.uk website. So some of the key things to pay attention to in the new Act, there's a lot to read and a lot to absorb in it, but we're going from MEAT to MAC. God, do I hate these acronyms. They're horrid, I don't like them at all, but we're going from scoring the most economically advantageous tender well to the most advantageous tender well. And the difference between MEAT and MAT is that it allows the client, the public sector body, to take into consideration all this social value and sustainability element, to see that as advantageous, even if they couldn't economically justify that previously. So this is really fab. This is really good for us. There's a wiggle word in there though. How annoying. So some of the wording in there says contracting authority may award the contract to the supplier with the most advantageous tender. So does that mean they might not? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. So let's just pay attention to the fact that we're all on the assumption that this means we're going to move to be able to recognise that social value and sustainability element, but will some clients maybe see that wiggle word as a way out of that? Not sure. That might be something we need to take up with some clients as we get into this. A big focus of the new Act is to increase spend with SMEs, small to medium enterprises, and VCSEs, which are voluntary community and social enterprises, and mutuals, which is another type of organisation. Essentially, it's about diversifying spend, and at the level of the Act document, this is a call to action for those public sector bodies to do that. So this hasn't quite yet got to us as contractors or consultants and things like that. This is the call to action that central government are going to have to meet. So they need to remove or reduce barriers for SMEs or other third sector social businesses, those kind of organisations, to be able to tender for this work. It's interesting that they use the terminology remove or reduce. So it's not about taking it away. It might be about making some tweaks to how people can access those opportunities. Again, just some interesting wording, but it's a very big focus. Starts off here in the Act as a central government call to action, and it trickles down into the policy statement and into the social value model too. So it starts off with them, but it ends up with us. So watch this space on that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The Act applies to most contracts, but there are definitely some Ministry of Defence exemptions and some other exemptions as well. So pay attention to that. The wording around those exemptions is a little bit weird. So I think there are some questions to ask around exactly when and where they apply. And there's also a question around, well, if it doesn't apply, what are they going to do? Because before, the Ministry of Defence have asked questions around social value, and they have volunteered to use the model, the PPN 0620 model that was applied previously. So interesting to see whether it means the Ministry of Defence just aren't interested in social value, or whether they're going to have something else that's specific to them. It sets objectives around value for money, maximise public benefit and integrity. So there's some stuff around practical objectives and like more intangible objectives in terms of how a public body's going to prove that they've been acting with integrity. So that's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And the framework implications are a little unclear in terms of how the Act and then the subsequent documents I'm going to talk to you about actually apply at some framework levels, because we all know that when we procure a framework, that's one layer, and then underneath that framework there are call-offs and call-off clients that have their own view and their own requirements they need to meet. So exactly how this manifests in a complex framework situation still needs some clients to provide some clarity on us for that, and it might mean we have to ask more questions and more TQs when we get tenders to make sure we are comfortable with that information before we dive deeply into answering bid questions. So the statement, this is separate document. This is on the gov.uk website. The statement is bringing the Act to life and is talking about the vision and mission that we want to have achieved by enacting what the Act says we should. It's a little bit more qualitative in what it's talking about in the statement, and it puts these missions on the table for us to pay attention to. So economic growth is one of these missions that the statement says we need to focus on. Again, reiterating the SME and BCSE spend. And if there's a section in the statement or in the social value model that doesn't talk about high quality jobs, I'm yet to see it. This term is everywhere in these documents, and it's undefined. What is a high quality job?
It's also, sorry, Carrie-Ann,
yeah.
to insert, but it's also interesting that in the Act itself, it says that SMEs are barred from being able to take contracting authorities to the High Court to challenge decisions based on being discriminated against for being SMEs. So it's got loads of stuff about SMEs and good quality jobs and all that in the nice policy statement.
Yeah.
But the fact is, if you're an SME and you feel like you've been wronged in a procurement because of you are small, you can't do anything about it. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, it's fun because the level of, so I don't want to be too controversial about my grumpiness with some of this, but the level of faith that there seems to be that the central government and public body departments have all this down, like everything they need to do to follow all the intricate processes been given to empower the SMEs and VCSEs. The reason that clause is there, I think, is because there's the assumption that the process for the procurement was pretty flawless and was following all these new rules. And reality of the last act we were working under says that it's not quite going to happen that way. So it's a bit of like misdirected faith, I think, that we're going to have to unpack in real life as opposed to on paper, which is how they're looking at it currently. So yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for kind of highlighting that we do, even though it is very honourable, a lot of this stuff, we're going to have challenges to make it happen. There's a lot of focus on kind of like for wages and things like that. So that's where economic growth is looking. There is a theme in there about taking back the streets, so reducing crime via community cohesion and jobs for hard to reach or underrepresented groups. So this is a bit unusual for us because in the statement it's there, it's a little bit woolly and it's a little bit hard, it's a bit tenuous, let's just say, in terms of the thing they've said is gonna end up with us having taken back our streets. But when we get into the reducing crime element of the social volume model, that is focused in its entirety on tackling domestic abuse. So I'll get to that in a couple of slides. But the fact that in the policy statement, it's about community cohesion and jobs and employment, skills and things, and then in the model, it's diverted slightly into something else. So I'm not quite sure how they're going to match up. There's breaking down barriers is another thing they want to do, which we saw in terms of, kind of making things accessible for these SMEs and VCSEs. But this is about addressing skills gaps and again connecting to this underrepresented part of the community to have them access opportunities. It's quite repetitive, this stuff. They're using the same terms over and over again. So when those things have been achieved in social value, how are they going to know which of these missions it's actually supporting when they get the published data of performance? That's another question. There's a theme on I think bringing on the NHS to kind of be the NHS of the future, and they see that happening by supporting good physical and mental health via high quality jobs and recruiting from underrepresented groups. Super tenuous, like super tenuous. How do we link those outcomes to proving that the NHS is future proofed? It seems like someone stuck that in the policy statement last minute without really thinking it through. It's super tenuous and super repetitive. So something for us to watch out doesn't bite us as we're doing the social value delivery, that we think it's meeting a particular part of this mission and vision, but it's meeting another one. They've got a statement in there that says suppliers that benefit from taxpayers' money are expected to deliver additional benefits. So that is something to pay attention to there. That is a mantra that they're working to, and that's why all this documentation is out and falling to us to pay attention to. So there is something we are expected to do on that front. So BPN 002 is one document and the model is another, but they go together, they work hand in hand. Few key bits of information about these. So the model is available now to use if anybody so wishes in central government, but it's mandated from October, so any procurement that happens from the 1st of October onwards, this has to be how they ask the social value requirement. The model question is in there like before, and it's similar to the model question we had previously. There's a couple of little tweaks, and there's a couple of bits of simplification. Not enough. It's still a convoluted question. It still has some repetitive elements to it. But there's like maybe a 5% improvement to it. So let's take that because it could have got worse. Let's just remember it could have got worse. In the model, there are 8 outcomes this time, but roughly 101 sub-criteria to those 8 outcomes and about 31 KPIs. It depends how you measure that, because there's a lot of bullet points in this document. When you have a look at it, it's really long. There's lots of sub-criteria to what are things you want you to do. So I haven't counted every single thing on there, but I've tried to take the main ones to give you an understanding of the scale of it. It sounds a little bit scary when I said that, but I did make a note of what we had in the last model. That was 5 themes, 24 model assessment criteria max, 121 sub-criteria and 45 KPIs. So we've got more outcomes or themes, and we've got less sub-criteria and less KPIs. So technically, that should make this a little bit more palatable. But if you have a look at it, I'm not sure you'll feel that way, because it's still really complicated. There's a lot of stuff we need to meet. 10% weighting on social value, which is the same as before, and anything that you commit will be made either a contractual clause, a KPI, or a performance indicator, a PI. So it's gonna go written down somewhere, let's just say, and the weighting of that for you will depend on how it manifests. Clients are required to choose one relevant outcome when they're doing their procurement, unless it's one of the government's most important contracts, which is undefined. So we don't know what they are at this point. So it's not been made explicit what would count value or scale in terms of being a most important contract. But I'm telling you this because if you get a bid that is relatively middle ground and it's got the whole model in it because the procurement professional hasn't read what they're supposed to do, then you need to go back and challenge that, because they are supposed to choose one, maybe 2, if they're trying to stretch boundaries here, but that's the guidance. And so I think what happened last time with the model is that procurement professionals were just putting the whole model into the bid and asking you to respond to everything, or pick your own themes that you think are relevant. That's not our job to do. That's their job to do. And that's what the guidance says. So that's why I've put that in here to remind us we might need to do some challenging. Also, when we put some commitments together in our bid world, this time the volume of your offer, as in the number of people, the number of hours, whatever it might be, they'll be asked for. So you should be doing that as best practice on most contracts. Frameworks might be a bit different and a bit trickier, but they will not be part of the evaluation, and the guidance specifically says that. So it's not about someone's offered 10 apprentices, someone's offered 20. It's about the methodology and detail that you're putting forward that gets evaluated. So that's something else to remember.
That's a really big deal, Carrie-Ann.
Yeah, I know.
It's the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, so that's what it says in the documentation. So
in effect, 10% or so somebody just at the same time, somebody was asked the question, if there's a minimum weighting of 10% for social value, is there an upper weighting limit? Is it between 10 and 20 or as big as they like?
It's as much as they want, but they have to business case it. So you have to justify why they want it to be more, why they feel for the contract it's relevant. And they also have to justify whether it's overall 10% or whether it's 10% of quality, depending on the type of contract that they're working to and things like that. So it could be 10% on its own and then 60 quality and whatever's left is left for cost, or it could be 10% of 70% quality.
That's really interesting. So again, because the mood music I've been picking up over the last couple of years was that the direction of travel was it was going to be a 20% minimum and 20% score. Yeah,
it was. I think there was ambition because they saw that it worked. The increased percentages worked in some circumstances, but I don't know. I think they're not confident enough about process and procedures to justify it having that weighting because the level of challenge might be more. Not sure.
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting lead-in, isn't it? Because get away from being a maths thing, which arguably you could argue either way was right or wrong. You know, we'll give you 10 apprentices versus, you know, a competitor's 8, and therefore we should get 10 marks and they should get 8, or work. So I can understand the pros and cons of either side of that. But now it's going to be subjective about your method.
Yeah. But it's going to be a qualitative assessment, which is a little bit like read qualitative as compliant with the award criteria, sub-criteria, and the offer of the KPI. So they've listed out some very ambitious award criteria and sub-criteria with very detailed sub-lists of the nuance of what they want. And so when you write your methodology, if you're not aligned to that, and you're going off piste from that, then that is where you'll come unstuck, I think, in terms of not being seen to meet the qualitative requirements.
Wow. Okay, so this is good for bidding people in some ways. In the us bid writing professionals, that's our game really, is making sure that we're compliant as a base principle. What the client's asking for. So we all should be very good at that, and should beat competitors who don't take it seriously from that standpoint. But it's it'll be a hard the signing up to governance piece here. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
It is, and I'll just digress just for like 2 minutes on something that I was going to add in that when we read kind of qualitative scoring as compliance with the award criteria and the sub-criteria, we have to look at the doing words that they've used in that massive sub-criteria list. And I'll read some of them out to you that will show you the difference in how you're going to write, how you're going to do that. So some of the doing words and the things they want you to be able to write about show that you're doing. So delivering activities, providing things, ensuring things, offering things, monitoring, measuring, understanding, influencing, supporting, mapping, demonstrating, outlining, structuring, and creating. So they're all the different, there's more. There's some of the doing words that are in that list. So how you articulate that you've created something is very different to how you articulate that you're ensuring something. It's different again to how you're influencing something. You're going to have to prove that you've done those doing words. So
just for starters, ensuring is a contractual legal term.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses won't sign up to that.
Yeah. So if we look at what the sub-criteria is saying now that we're going to be qualitatively scored on that, then we're going to have to be very good at articulating ourselves in terms of those commitments that we make.
You're going to be busy, aren't you?
We're all going to be busy. We're all going to be busy. So
just because it's on this, really important for these guys on reflection. So fundamentally, just to confirm, Carrie-Ann, if one company offers 6 apprentices and another one offers 1, but they have the same methodology and basically say the same thing, they'll get the same score.
Yes. That's what the guidance says, that volumes of offers are not evaluated. It's very specific. There's no wiggle words in that. And if anybody wants, you can ask after. I'll find the document and the bit of the document that it says in for you as well, because I know there's not a lot to look through, so I know where it is. And I can maybe just put a little link or reference into the slide before I get them sent out for you, so you can see it.
Please.
Yeah.
That's really quite interesting. Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to the other points in a bit.
Okay, cool. So I'll just put this together so when I was talking all those numbers and you're like, what? What are you talking about? How many of these? I just wanted to map it out. It's just a simple little word table that I just did for myself so I can understand what's what. it's interesting to look at though, because the outcomes start off super simple and then they end up like really wordy and convoluted towards the end. And the more wordy and convoluted outcomes are, the harder they are to measure, monitor, and prove that you're doing what you said. Because like outcomes or whatever themes or whatever you want to call them, they should be simple because you should be tracking one type of activity. So I thought it was really interesting to see the journey of these outcomes as they go through the new model, and the fact that number 1, number 3, and number 6 are scarier than others. So if we are preparing ourselves to be able to answer questions on this that come through, we need to be ready to be asked what is in these. That said, some of the ones that look a little bit more friendly, like number 5, which just has 1 award criteria and 2 sub-criteria of 1 KPI, like it's super simple if they're going to ask us that. If you ask you that, they might be asking you more than 1 theme because they might think it's not enough. But also the data that you need to back up that, and maybe the change in process in your organisation or new policies and things like that would mean these might look at face value as simpler, but would require a lot of process change within your organisation and discussion and workshopping and decisions all the way up to board level with HR or IT or others around what are we going to do? Because, like I said, in the model, theme 5 is about tackling domestic violence. And if you haven't got much in place on that and you get asked about that, you're going to have to be ready to have an ability to demonstrate that you're doing it. So it looks friendly on the table, but maybe in real life isn't going to be super friendly for you to prove and deliver against if you're not ready for it. So be wary of taking some of this at face value as well. So some stuff that's a bit better. So our old model on one side, our new one on the other. We were asked for multiple outcomes and themes previously. One, because our procurement people the client side procurement people didn't read the guidance, they put the whole model in and asked us to do everything. And we didn't want to upset anybody by challenging it. And likely we should be getting 1 or 2 outcomes asked in this procurement because it's very explicit in the guidance. The quantity of your offer could be evaluated before, and now it's not. Volumes are expected to be offered but not evaluated. Big change. Another significant change is that before it was all about full-time equivalents. So this term came about for various reasons. It's in some ONS stats, it's in some other things, it's in the National TOMS framework, stuff like that. So that was about looking at your workforce and having to do maths and calculations on what does this number of humans mean in terms of full-time jobs, because not everybody is full-time on a project. Quite a lot of people aren't, probably more people aren't than are, especially when it comes to like your overhead staff and stuff like that. So now we're asked for roles, so different roles, not full-time equivalents for some of the outcomes, some of the sub-criteria.
That's definitely going to get gamed.
Yeah, but it got gamed before. So it's 6 of 1, isn't it? But it's just a different term. So you're now having to you do your histogram for your workforce, and before you had to do maths on it to say the number, but now you don't have to do maths on it because they're the roles
But
you're going to need.
Put 1,000 people on it for 20 minutes each.
Yeah.
In saying that, they're not measuring the quantity.
They're not measuring the quantity. So I don't know whether someone is just trying to get away from that national TOM measure. Don't know why they've done it. I've no intel on that. So, but it's there. I just wanted people to know about it. The model question before was quite confusing and really repetitive, and now it's just a bit confusing and a bit less repetitive, but it's certainly not fixed. It's still a convoluted question. It's still ask for very similar things at different parts of the question that look like you have to repeat yourself. So definitely need to get to grips with it and look at it. But we've got probably a 5% improvement. So, let's take that because it could have been worse. There's no COVID theme. So hurrah, because up until 6 months ago, people were still being asked to respond to the COVID thing in the last model because procurement people weren't paying attention to what they were asking for. So hurrah. So COVID said, gone. And before there were really detailed cyber essentials requirements for supply chain, so the KPIs on this, things we had to put into place to demonstrate that our supply chain had undertaken certain levels of cyber essentials training and upskilling, and there's nothing in this. It's gone. So something else, it's still there because there's a procurement policy note on it, so it's still in the world of the Act, but it's not in our social value bit. It's somewhere else. Stuff that's going to be a bit trickier. So you're going to have to capture a load of diversity data, which everybody hates, and we're all talking about GDPR and everything else that goes with that and the challenges. But unfortunately, it's there. It's in the KPIs. I've done a little arrow to the italics at the top, and it's just some examples of what I mean. So some of the KPIs are defined by age. So you have to say how many people who are over 16 are paid something or given a contract of a certain type, how many people who are 18 to 20 and how many people who are 20 plus. So you've got some age boundaries. You've got to be able to talk about your spend with startups, SMEs, VCSEs and mutuals. So if you don't know what your supply chain makeup is and what the categorization of the businesses you're procuring from are, then you're not going to be able to meet that KPI and you're going to have a problem. So you're going to have to change your data capture. And you're going to have to be able to talk about underrepresented people as a proportion of the workforce and receiving opportunities. And that might have been defined by the client, or you might have to define it. It's a bit woolly currently, but you're still going to have a way of talking about that. And usually they're badging that over as people with protected characteristics. So people's age, gender, race, ethnicity, disability status, things like that. So eek, I think, for a lot of businesses, because you're probably on a journey with diversity data, but it's epic in terms of what they're asking for in here. Another new thing that's a bit trickier, outcome 5, is completely focused on tackling domestic abuse and supporting victims and survivors. So it's going to be scary new to other people that don't have anything in place for this. The Home Office did ask this question out in the ether a little while ago, so they've been meddling with this a little bit in some squirreled procurements that happened, but for most people it's going to be brand new. There was a big focus before on modern slavery. It's even more detailed now, and the KPIs are a bit different too. So the modern slavery kind of element hasn't gone anywhere, and it's got a bit more intense with data tracking. General corporate policies / the activities within them won't count in your social value. So if you try and give them a generic statement about what you do as a business and don't contextualize it or make it specific to that contract, then they will disregard it. So be wary of that. It can be used to complement your methodology, to talk about how you have it. And you can say, we're going to mirror what we did to launch that policy behaviourally on this project, run workshops, blah, blah, blah. So you can use it in your narrative, but you can't say that's what you're getting because they don't see it as additional. Commitments must be over and above the goods and services in the contract. So this will apply to some and not others. But if you were going to provide employability, government services, employability as an offer isn't going to count because you're being paid to do that. So be wary of that. And specifically, jobs must be advertised via the job centre and Find a Job website and subcontract on Contract Finder, and that'll be in your contract to do that and prove you've done that.
That last bit, subcontracts bit, is that new?
I thought it was, but I'm not 100% sure.
I think it is.
So, and it's quite specific about that it has to go through Contract Finder and that it goes in as a clause that you do that, because they've got dummy text for the clause for the procurements to use.
Not sure. If I was a supply chain manager for a contractor or someone, a big prime, I'm not sure how I'd feel about that, because they're going to get bombarded with loads of crap, aren't they?
Yeah.
The strength in your supply chain is a decent methodology in how you curate it, really. So that's going to be interesting. Again, I think that's one of those government things that sounds like a great idea, participation and transparency and opening the door to SMEs and things, but I think that might be a bit of a nightmare. We shall see.
Yeah.
We've got some questions on this one. Sorry, Carrie-Ann, if you just...
Yeah. Okay, I'm going back.
Thank you. So just a bit of coaching, I guess, to my bidding friend. The domestic abuse thing, I'm a non-exec of a domestic abuse charity. That is a spectacularly deep and obviously very sensitive subject with way beyond GDPR implications.
Yeah.
And so I would get into the reading. We're not going to cover it in this webinar. I would get into the reading of what they mean by that and get ahead of it, because that's going to be a problem, I can guarantee.
Yeah, and the complexity behind it, if we look here, there's one model award criteria, there's two sub-criteria, and one KPI. So they're not asking for very, very complex demonstration of what you've done. It's quite behavioural and quite processy, and I think it's trying to get best practice in place for people to have a way to tackle this in the workplace and support people in the workplace and raise awareness and stuff like that. So it's not too onerous, but it is still a subject matter that a lot of us haven't corporately addressed, and you will need to. So yes, definitely read that. Also, we're at the mercy of it being chosen as one of the themes that we respond to, and it's one of 8. So the procuring party has to feel comfortable that that's appropriate for that contract as well.
Okay, cool. Fair enough.
Okay. So some stuff you could do. This is like a referencey thing, so I'm not going to go war and peace, because I do want to answer some questions and things, but it's there for you to have a look at after this webinar. But have a think about what you're doing around modern slavery and upping your game on that if you're not doing enough. There's also a little bit in there about being able to offer sick pay to new starters instead of them having to wait for 3 months, and some very specific requirements around being able to do that for people as soon as they enter the workforce. So if that isn't something that you do and you get asked outcome 1 and it's not tweaked by the procurer, then you're probably going to have to demonstrate that you have something in place to do that. Understand what high growth sectors mean to you. So when you have to articulate an answer about you tackling upskilling around high growth sectors, you actually have something rational to say about that. Consider membership with Social Enterprise UK and interrogate your supply chain to understand how it's made up, and maybe look at some contracts that are aligned to diverse spend, like the provision of your sanitary towels in women's loos and men's loos for those that have incontinence problems and things like that. You can usually use a social enterprise or a VCSE for things like that, and if you're not, then let's make sure you get on that. Looking at social value and environmental teams joining up on things for outcome 4, and for outcome 5, the domestic abuse piece, there is a covenant and there is some membership with IDA as well that you can look at, and I think there is a free version of membership with them as well, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to cost you a lot of money. Look at being able to demonstrate you have a minimum understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging in the business for outcome 6. Understand specific barriers to for underrepresented people that you want to tackle and review that annually for 7. Consider some health and wellbeing stuff for 8. So GP sessions in offices aligning to ISO 45003. And when you've put stuff in place for staff like apps and stuff for health and wellbeing, check if people are using it, because it's a bit pants if you put it in and they're not using it. Risk assess the model KPIs for data capture gaps. So look at the KPIs in the list and say, do we have data to meet that KPI? And if we don't, you're going to have to plan some change management. Finally, if you haven't answered a PPN question before, map an existing tender response into the model question and see where you don't have collateral to answer elements of the model question, and then go and fix that, because it's quite convoluted and you'll have gaps. If you've not done it before, you'll need to write some new stuff. So be ready for that. Don't forget, clients are supposed to sense check what they're asking for, map it to local and regional needs. They're also only supposed to ask for one outcome. There are other PPNs to look at, I've listed them there. You can challenge how the model is applied if you think they've not followed the guidance, so don't be shy. Max and sub-criteria have got a mixture of the active and passive requirements. That list of doing words I just told you. So pay attention to what you're having to articulate you're doing. Is it ensuring? Is it, I forgot one of the other words, offering, whatever the other words were. And frameworks might get a bit weird. It's unclear how it's going to manifest in terms of frameworks, and I can send a little note on that at the bottom of the slide in terms of what they've said so far. But I want to answer some questions, and we've not got loads of time because I've waffled. So let's answer some questions.
I asked some as we went, didn't we? We've had a good chat. So
yeah.
I'll pick some up for you, Carrie-Ann. So my friend Charlotte, I haven't seen for a while, asks, do you think that outcomes, sub-criteria and KPIs will change more regularly over time? And I'll connect that to Anna has asked, do we think the new mission focus will date the model politically and mean that things will undergo reviews as we get changes in government and all that kind of stuff?
So history tells us they're going to leave it like it is for as long as possible, and that it might not even be on the radar for change through any political stuff that happens, because we weren't even sure with the new Labour government now that they were going to update the social value model and stuff. It was a surprise to people. We had our suspicions, don't get me wrong, because we've all got common sense, but once they've published something, they tend not to meddle. And I think the other thing is we are still seeing budget cuts and staffing cuts within public sector. So expertise is getting less, not more, within the public sector organisations. So their ability to learn something new and pivot is going to get less. And it's taken a huge amount of time and money to get everybody upskilled to the new Act and the new PPNs and the new model. So they're going to be fighting to retain that staff that have done all that training, and they're not going to want to distract them with more training and upskilling, which they'd have to do if they change this stuff.
I think I saw a LinkedIn post by a guy called Mark Johnson yesterday, who's written a bit of a sort of précis of all of this, and his major criticism, which chimed with me, was there's no thinking here in terms of opportunity to collaborate across government departments or leverage scale, economies of scale, those kind of things. All of this is on procurement, which is stupid. There's shed loads of procurements going along where we could leverage the scale of these things, almost industrialise the social value response. So that's quite silly. My friend
they have said in the documentation, in really woolly little statements, that they want, I just found it in my notes because I've got loads of notes, they want to see partnership across organisational boundaries.
but they're not enabling procurements to tap into that,
No, it's a vague statement without anything really defined. So I think they kind of know they should be doing that stuff, but it's just not supported.
Yeah, which leads me back to a point right from the start about the MOD being able to do what they want. From Catherine, a question from Sean about that. Apparently, Sean was saying that the MOD are at Birmingham NEC tomorrow at Procurement Act Live, because everyone loves to make a bit of money out of these things, don't they?
Yeah.
So hopefully someone gets to ask a question firsthand there, but it is interesting that they can opt out. Obviously, the PM has just committed yesterday to upping
more defence spending, all that.
Which the ears pricked up. Obviously, that's an opportunity for us, Carrie-Ann.
Yeah. We love a defence bid.
Not a defence. Well,
we love a defence bid.
Not sure, actually. They're a big procurement, and this will be fun for them. I
think they'll do something. I don't think they're going to shirk the social value piece. I think they've made a case for what's on the table not being fit for purpose for them for some reason, but I don't know what the reason is. In all the kind of stuff with this, there is caveats that like a public body can write their own MAC or set of sub-criteria or KPIs if they can justify that. They can tweak them so they can take sub-criteria out if they don't think it applies and stuff like that. I don't think anybody is going to do any of that because everybody's going to be so busy and distracted. But it's written in there that they can. So it must be something pretty specific that the MOD think isn't right. Because they could have written their own MACs and ignored what was in there if they really wanted to align, but they obviously don't. Yeah, I think they'll do something.
Well, they're really big public stuff, like whatever it is they do. So they've just purchased Terra Firma's service personnel housing back for a few billion quid. So they suddenly own a shitload of houses again. And what are they going to do with that will be quite interesting. That'll be, whatever happens, that'll be a series of, or a large contract that's in the public interest. They should do something significant in terms of social.
Yeah. And the other thing is there's mandatory publishing of some KPI data in amongst this stuff as well. I've only had half an hour or 45 minutes to chat, but there's loads of other stuff that's not covered. So maybe it's because the MOD aren't comfortable publishing some minimum sets of KPIs for security and confidentiality reasons. So could be that. Not sure, but I think they'll do something.
Yeah, they'll do something. The one to keep an eye on will be Crown Commercial Services Construction Services framework bid that's due to come out in the next couple of months. I forget when. But the defence get to ask they're the only central government department that get to ask their own questions as part of that tender for their lot, or they have. It'll be interesting to see what comes out this time. But an eye on the questions that they are. I'd express an interest in get hold of the documents just to see what the questions are that they ask in that. So I think that would be quite telling, and that's quite a big one, quite a public one. But what they do with more military, deployment stuff as they're buying up kit and stuff and things might be a bit more grey. We'll have to see. The other thing, Carrie-Ann, I was very disappointed to hear that on the National Hospital Programme, you mentioned health in there, is mentioned specifically. On the National Hospital Programme, they had a bunch of social value consultants write them a bunch of stuff in terms of what they should be doing at the centre to kind of engender or make social value happen at an industrial scale, and they've bottled it and taken it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That wasn't from Carrie-Ann, by the way, that was from someone else. But
that wasn't me. Yeah. Don't try and throw me under the bus there, but no. Disappointing.
So they're just going to use a standard model, believe that the contractors will do some stuff. The contractors will now make up a methodology with very low numbers in it because it doesn't matter. Well,
some of them will. I'll give some of them some credit that they'll still put honest, added value offers together. Like some contractors will do the right thing.
Sure, they will. Will there be any wiggle room if you are unable to deliver on an SV commitment as they are making it part of the contract? For example, If you said that you were willing to do 20 hours, but the value of the contract wasn't what you thought when you're into delivery and you only deliver 10, would they be penalised, the contract cancelled, etc., etc.?
I think the process for dealing with naughty people that aren't meeting the KPIs is dependent on how they manifest it in the contract, whether it's a clause, a KPI or a PI, because they've all got different mechanisms for how they look at your performance. I haven't seen anything scary about, kind of cancelling you as a default mechanism for if you're not performing, but there is stuff in the Act itself about serious consequences for people that shirk their commitments on a regular basis. So as you go up the tree from the model through the statement up to the Act, then the further up you get, the worse the consequences could be. So I think on the ground, you will have chance to negotiate through with your client or your framework about not being able to do something, and if your reasons are honourable for that and you want to offer something else instead, it will be completely okay to do that. I think if you thought sod it several times, you might actually get barred from from responding to procurements for that client or framework.
Oh, all public sector clients.
Yeah, or everybody. Yeah, it's one for all, isn't it?
And so, but I would say in that particular instance, if the scope has changed or something delivery, then you'll be fine.
Same the other way, that if the cost has increased because materials and labour have increased cost-wise, but the actual scope is the same, then they shouldn't be asking you to do more if you've not got more people and more stuff that you're doing. It's just the stuff you're doing is more expensive. That doesn't generate more social value requirements. So the other way around, you shouldn't accept. If 20% of the cost has increased, you shouldn't be doing 20% more social value as a default. That's not the assumption they should be making.
Cool. Okay, good to know. Thank you, Carrie-Ann. There's loads of questions that we haven't got to. I suspect what might be a good idea is that we come back together again in a few weeks' time, maybe a month or 6 weeks' time, once we've seen some procurements begin to happen, and we have a bit of a wash-up session on what we're finding here, because Scott and Olivia are asking questions about frameworks, for instance, stuff like that. We're going to need to see. I think it will be interesting to see what CCS do with theirs, and there are a couple of big ones coming down the pipe fast. So
yeah,
we'll get to it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for everybody on the Q&A. Sorry, I forgot to switch the chat on, but Q&A's worked. So yeah, the recording of this will go out by email today or tomorrow, when the Wednesday or the Thursday, 26th, 27th. Keep an eye out for all of the other free stuff that you can sign up for as part of that. And like I say, I think I'll put Carrie-Ann's arm up her back to come back together once we can see how the land lies when this stuff starts to land. Thanks very much, Carrie-Ann.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.